So our speaker this morning is Matthew Pryor. Matthew's from a company called Observant. I first encountered or became aware of that company last December when I was in Longreach, and I was talking to a fellow who runs a fair number of cattle up there, and he was showing me his mobile phone, and he could look at what was happening in each of his 30 bores, which were spread over what used to be a bore run of 330 or 40 kilometres that he had to do every day, because of course in that environment, if the water shuts off to your stock, cattle only last 24 hours and they're gone. So this fellow had gone from a daily bore run on dirt roads of that sort of distance to, as he said, I now sit at home and trade shares on the screen and look at my bores on my mobile phone app. So amazing technology and amazing changes in the way it allows livestock to be managed and operated in that sort of an environment. And so Matthew's involved in Observant, which is the company, and it's now involved in exporting to the US as well. So in line with our theme this morning and today of talking about productivity, talking about competitiveness, I think this is a great way to start the day, a great story. So please welcome Matthew Pryor.
Thanks, Mick. Can everyone hear me okay? That's great. I'm not sure that gambling on the share market is exactly the outcome we were after there, but people are free to do with their spare time as they see fit. You'll notice that I'm already off script. The title of my slides here a little bit controversially titled Building an Internet of Farming Things, but I think we'll get there basically anyway. So in 1788, 3 months after the British established their first colony in Australia and were met with an environment that was very different to the one that they left, and were faced with the prospect of building an agricultural system to support what they expected to be a growing population. They had with them 5 rabbits, and they probably were regretting that decision, 7 horses, 7 cattle, 18 turkeys, 29 geese, 29 sheep, 35 ducks, 74 pigs, 209 chooks. Now, you think about what they were faced with, and they were bringing agricultural practices that came from a different hemisphere, from a different continent, to an environment that was pretty inhospitable and not all that compatible necessarily with what they brought with them, rabbits not included. We zoom forward to today and we think about Australia as a food production system, and there are 134,000 plus farms, 27 million beef cattle in the country, 75 million sheep. We produce in the order of 22 million tonnes of wheat every year, over 4 million bales of cotton. 99% of the farms are family owned. 93% of our food that we consume in Australia is produced locally. Every farm feeds 600 people every day, 150 of those in Australia and 450 of those outside of Australia. So it's a pretty amazing feat. $43 billion worth of production covering 396 million hectares, 51% of the land mass of the country. So by any measure, that's an amazing feat in a pretty short space of time. We've effectively terraformed the country that, turned out was one of the driest on the planet and had some ancient and not particularly good soils. And so that's an incredible feat of productivity, and we've built a food production system that is the envy of a lot of countries. So what's the problem? Right? That sounds like a pretty good outcome to me. And it's true. It's true. It's an amazing feat. And I'm sure we've already talked about, and we'll talk a lot about, Australia's response to those conditions and our innovation and our focus on productivity, particularly on farm. But the problem is that during that time, and certainly forward from now, the planet is growing and the population of the planet is growing, and I'm sure that everybody's heard this figure a million times. But the pace with which our agricultural production systems over the globe has to continue to grow is breathtaking. We've got to increase 70% by that same target to keep up with food demand based on a population growth and based on a growing middle class and all these things that everybody's heard before. So if you look backward and you see, 2.5% roughly total factor productivity increases up to 2000, that's kind of on the money. I guess that sort of gets us there. The problem is, of course, that more recent times we've seen a significant drop-off in productivity, and that presents a problem, as well as many other things, competition for resources and the like. Now, there was a great presentation at the CEDA event in Melbourne 2 days ago that talked about some of the reasons for that slowdown, and there are many, and I'm sure that you can't boil it down to one single thing, but certainly drought is a contributing factor. Certainly the sorts of technologies that came out of the Green Revolution, the pace of that has slowed down, the uptake of technology, the spread of knowledge, all of these things contribute to that slowdown, but we have to reverse that trend. Everybody's sure that technology has a big role to play, and hopefully what we're going to spend a lot of today talking about is the many different ways that that technology can be applied to productivity increases. So why build this internet of farming things? What would be the point of applying technology advancements in electronics and information technology to a farming enterprise? What's wrong with what we've got and the tools we already have? Or what could we get? Of course, people understand, and we've already seen dramatic yield improvements through many different technologies, many of them genetic, many of them chemical, and increasingly information being one of those, one of the tools to add to the tool set. There is a lot of ways in which costs can be lowered. Mick already related the story there, and some of our customers who do work in extensive systems where vehicle costs and fuel costs are significant factors. They see really dramatic reductions in operating costs. A reduction of inputs obviously is a benefit to everybody. A lot of farm inputs are based on fairly scarce resources where the supply chain isn't necessarily as much in our control as we might like. Improvements both in sustainability, and I felt that accountability was a bit of a controversial word to put there. Maybe traceability is a better word. David Farley also made a fantastic presentation to the CEDA event, and he, I'm sure, very lovingly referred to the Chardonnay and latte sets, whose hearts and minds have to be won. And given that I live in Kew and work in Fitzroy, I probably fit both those descriptions. But the point is that consumers are increasingly interested in the provenance of what they consume, and information technology is a major tool whereby that information can be provided, and traceability that consumers want and increasingly demand, whether it's in the supply chain or at the end of the supply chain. Obviously, raising labour productivity is very important as well. In Australia, where we increasingly challenge to find people to work in our agricultural enterprises, and at different times and in different economies, struggle with co-locating and competing against other industries for labour productivity is a big factor. Extension needs to change. We've already seen a significant withdrawal of government in extension services, and again, maybe it's controversial to say, but I suspect that increases, and we have to think of different ways that extension services that historically have come through those channels can be done, and technology and information technology in particular offers significant opportunities there. And one in particular, the rise and inexorable adoption of social media presents really compelling ways for best practice and comparison and sharing of information that might otherwise have been done in traditional social settings to be done much better across the country and across the world. And importantly, data and information probably that comes from that data is the new green revolution. Now, what do I mean by that? I don't know if people really understand what I mean by that, but we've already seen companies that historically we used to know what they do, moving into much more of a technology base. Very interesting lead into my talk in the discussion of where New Farm are at now and the different investments that they're making in a whole range of technologies. Monsanto's acquisition of Climate Corporation and their very significant investment in information technology is the surest indicator of the conviction of the industry and suppliers in the industry that information and information management is the game. It is where technology is leading us, and it is where the greatest opportunities for technology and driving productivity are. So if we think that this is a good idea, then what would it look like? What would an Internet of Farming things look like? How do we go about building this? What's already out there? There is a lot of it already underway, and a lot of companies doing and research groups doing a lot of interesting stuff. I don't know, I work in the technology field, and so when I use phrases like the Internet of Things, I'm assuming that those terms, have made their way into the sort of general public discourse and what that means. And, I'm guessing that people in Silicon Valley wouldn't necessarily think that that big green thing is part of the Internet of Things, but, my answer to that would be most definitely yes. That this isn't your cousin's Internet of Things. When technology people particularly talk about the Internet of Things, they're talking about wearable technology, and they're talking about healthcare, and they're talking about lots of other things. But when you talk about what a thing is in the internet, what people are meaning to say is that it's not what's typically on the internet, which is people, right? The traditional consumers and participants in the internet have been either producers or consumers of information, and for the most part, there are people on both ends of that pipeline. When we're talking about Internet of Things, the implication is that at least on one end of the pipe is something that's not a person. And what sort of an interaction can you have with that thing, and what's it going to do for you, and what would be the point of connecting them all together? So you can look at them, great, so potentially maybe they can talk to each other. That could be very interesting. The wearable technology and the stuff that you might have seen in the media and Google Glass and all these kinds of things, I guess I, sort of yawn a little bit when I see things like that. And, some of those technologies certainly have great potential, but a lot of them are still in the toy category and are still in the kind of gadget category. What is so exciting about the intersection between agriculture and technology and precision farming is that it's so real. And when we are looking for people to join our business, the most gratifying thing for me is the passion that people can bring to that pursuit of doing real things. And I mean real too, because you've got to find the balance between what you can do today and what you can do, in the near future, and what might be possible but isn't really practical. I don't have a crystal ball. I haven't come here to reel off a list of kind of exciting new technologies. We've been in business for 10 years. We've been involved in a lot of different kind of research, and part of the point of research, certainly sort of foundation and fundamental research, is to talk about what's possible, or to throw stones at the glass walls of what people think is possible. But ultimately, the job of companies like us is to find that balancing point between what's possible and what's practical. Practical works, and if you look at, so much of Australia's ingenuity and productivity has come from finding that balancing point between what you've got at your disposal and what you can achieve with it, and pragmatism, is a great tool. The reality is that farms are pretty terrible places to put electronics, that they're full of stuff, full of pretty much everything that electronics hates. Lots of water, we can't do anything without water. We need heat. We need, dust is a natural byproduct of our production environment, and all of these things are an anathema to sensitive microelectronics. So it's a challenge. When people, technology people, talk about the Internet of Things, they would have you believe that it's made up of these tiny little things that you're going to wear all over your body or put in your back pocket. Fitbit would be another example of something that maybe someone in the room's even wearing one, I don't know. But the fact is that most things in our environment are not small, and for the most part our environment is big, and there's an impedance mismatch between small things and big things, and cattle, in particular, are curious beasts, and things should be bigger than bite-sized. So if we were going to build this Internet of Things, then what would be the point of it? The point of it is to capture high frequency, dense information, because what we need is further insight, and what we want to understand is the operational status of our crop, of our livestock, of our operations. Doing things which can't be done practically by manual observations. These things aren't a replacement for manual observations, but they augment and make things achievable and economically viable that simply can't be done without technology. We've got to collect this information from everywhere, and what you've seen perhaps historically with technology is that technology tended to be siloed and tended to, you had either kind of MODIS satellite stuff, or you had, directly sensed information, or you had information that came from, one particular place. I'm sure that everybody has seen and is sort of excited by the possibilities of drones in agricultural settings. Satellite technologies continue to improve. Massive investments are being made in satellites that will acquire much more frequent data and much higher resolution data and make it much more available. I'm sure everybody here has been frustrated by how old the Google Map is. We did a renovation on our house, I think 5 years ago, and my old house is still on Google Maps. And not that I really care about that, but if you're looking for changes in your land management boundaries or fence lines and these sorts of things, 2, 3, 4-year-old satellite imagery is not much help. All that information has to be brought together, and this is one of the big challenges, and it's certainly both an operational, competitive, and to some extent, depending on where you are, a kind of sovereign risk concern about where that information goes, who manages that information, who owns that information. It's certainly been brought together. The cloud, in a lot of ways, cloud technologies, and again, my apologies if I'm using that phrase in a kind of offhand way, and it's not, it's not something that people understand in their everyday course of business, but the idea basically that computing is turned into a utility like electricity, and that you can just use as little or as much of it as you like, and you don't need to worry about whose job it is to make sure there is enough. Now, of course, the devil's in the details, and electricity doesn't always work that way. But the concept of cloud computing is basically that you're giving the job to somebody else to say how much you want, and you just pay for what you need, and you don't need to worry about where the data center is or how big it is or whether it's got power or whether it's got generators and backup and all that sort of thing. And we need to leverage all of the fantastic innovation that's happened in IT. And I come from an IT background, historically done a terrible job really at making information technology usable to the agricultural industries, not because it wasn't well applied, but really it required people who understood both information technology and agriculture to do it right. The fact is that typically a farmer not only has to be an expert in whatever it is they're producing, but all of the risk management and the insurance and 100 other things. And people who come from the information technology industry typically have this preconception that people in agriculture don't understand technology. It's simply that technology gets, you know, a very thin slice of attention, and our job is to make sure that the benefit you can get from technology fits in with the amount of attention that it deserves, not what it needs because it wasn't designed properly. So people, again, big data is a phrase that is increasingly coming into the parlance of agriculture. My apologies, I forgot to get my phone out to check my time. And the fact is that big data means a lot of things to a lot of people, but all you have to do is imagine that on any standard agricultural enterprise you have, you know, a plant monitoring technology, maybe at the plant scale, certainly say if it was in high value tree crops on the tree scale, and you're wanting to monitor the environmental conditions, the water conditions, the, you know, soil temperature, EC, environment, evapotranspiration, you're going to end up with a lot of information. And big data just says, okay, when we get more than in that people can understand at one time, we A, have to manage it, and B, have to work out how to make sense of it, how to filter it, how to turn it into information that's actionable rather than, you know, an Excel spreadsheet with 1 million columns and 1 million rows that nobody can make any sense of. The whole point of all of that would be to enable improved decision making. Now, agriculture is so diverse and you know, in Australia, let alone the world, what those decisions are and what those insights might be are very specific, and so there end up being lots of companies who focus on specific parts of that problem. But ultimately, you know, improved decision making, access to better information, comparison of practice change, of environmental condition change to drive that, and importantly, automation where automation is possible. Two very important outcomes. Okay, so that's all great, and you know, a lot of hand waving and what ifs and this would be great sort of stuff. But so what? How would you do it? What are the problems? What are the things in particular that we've learned about, you know, success factors, I suppose? Sometimes there's this attitude, especially in technology, that, you know, all we've got to do is build it and people will come. You know, that if I make a great widget, surely someone's going to buy it. And I think it's actually one of the biggest problems that adoption of technology faces with respect to agriculture is that attitude that just because it's technology, you know, it's got to be better than what we're currently doing. The onus is on us, the producers of technology, to make it simple and reliable and usable and useful. And it's so often forgotten that, you know, building it is about a 10%. You know, idea is about 5%. It's all about the application and the adoption. Second thing is that it's tough out there, and I don't just mean, you know, from an environmental point of view that it's a difficult place for electronics, but it's a difficult place to do business because you not only have to get the product into someone's hands, but you've got to keep it working, and you've got to wrap technology around all of the services that are required to keep it working, not just to get it into the grower's hands. We often deal in areas that are very remote, that are, you know, massive in scale, thousands of square kilometres, out in places where there is no power, where there is no Telstra service, and the products have to work just as well there as they do, you know, in a horticultural enterprise in Werribee. That I don't know where that guy came from, but anyway. You know, the environment is tough, we know. I mean, you know, it's hard enough for our livestock and our crops to cope with what nature throws at it, let alone sensitive electronics. It gets very cold, it gets very hot. I actually looked this up, and there have been quite a few studies on the bite pressure of birds like corellas, and apparently it exceeds 300 psi at the very tip of a corella's beak. Now, making stuff that, you know, they're very beautiful birds and I really love them, but you know, if you leave stuff out in their environment for long enough and 1,000 of them want to land on it and they've got 300 psi bite pressure, they can do a lot of damage. And so you know, our technology can be as amazing and deliver fantastic productivity benefits, but if it can't withstand the corella, don't bother. And in addition to that, the whole point is that, you know, we are out in an environment where typically people aren't, and people love being there. I was speaking to someone who was, who I asked to, part of an agribusiness network, whether she was coming today, and she explained that she had a bunch of important business meetings and things on, and meetings with ministers and the like, and she said, but I'd prefer to be out watching the harvest. And the fact is that we're all part of this industry because we love it, but, you know, there's a lot of it, and most of the time we're not there, and if we have to go there to pick up a piece of equipment that's stopped working, then, you know, that equipment hasn't done its job. A lot of technology comes out of consumer, and you know, I'll need to plug that in at 2 o'clock today. So again, that doesn't cut it. You've got to have technology that's designed for the environment, that's designed to be self-sufficient and self-supporting. You know, everything about your business model has to take the practical realities of the environment into consideration. So if, you know, supplies are needed and they're exotic and they have to come from some place, and, you know, they need overnight shipping here or there, then that's not going to cut it either. We talk a lot about smartphones, but the fact is that what we call a smartphone is actually pretty dumb, right? I mean, it's great when I'm sitting there driving it, but if I leave it sitting there on the edge of the stage, it'll just slowly run out of battery and die. And, you know, if I manage to get onto the Find My Phone before it runs out of battery, okay, great, I'll remember where I left it. But the fact is, and this was very hard for me to ultimately realise, is that, you know, most people don't love technology. I happen to like it, and it was a hobby of mine when I was growing up. But, you know, people tend to treat our products like they do, you know, most other agricultural equipment, and that's totally okay. But I'm sure that our designer didn't ever imagine that the product would end up in that particular situation. And the fact also is that when I say, you know, duct tape is expensive but baling twine is cheap, that by nature, the way, you know, we as an industry have of solving a problem is by grabbing whatever happens to be at hand. And so if on the inside wall of the shed there's a whole lot of baling twine, you know, looped through one of the posts, and you need something to secure something, then that bit of orange string is going to end up serving the purpose. So again, it goes back to the design intent of the technology, and it's very important for people to understand that. It's very important that you have to be flexible in your approach, that the environment varies so much, and that technology essentially needs to be treated like a satellite, that we want that product to go out and never come back, and that it should just sit there doing its job for 10 years and dialing home every 5 minutes. That, you know, practical things like installation really matter. That if you know, you can't install that product with a cordless drill and a couple of tech screws in 20 minutes, then it's not going to do its job. So, you know, given all of that, given all those, both the opportunities and the difficulties of that environment, what have we learnt that's important? Probably the biggest thing we learned is that the initial cost of an investment in technology is nowhere nearly as important as the operating cost. Now, that might not be a revelation to a lot of people who lease equipment and who generally operate agricultural equipment, but for the technology industry, it typically is. And people often don't think about the cost of warranty and the cost of service and how will they implement that. Imagine that a lot of people here have had very frustrating experiences when their PC stops working, and, you know, Apple say, oh, well, you can come into the Genius bar and you know, the Genius will fix it up for you. But if that's 4 or 6 or 8 hours away and you've got a harvest to get in, then that's not really going to do it for you. Cost to serve is really important, and increasingly as services and information move into the digital realm, those ongoing costs become increasingly important, and from a supplier's point of view are really critical to profitability, but of course also matter for the agricultural enterprise, that if we substitute some capital cost for an unsustainably high operating cost, then we haven't delivered true productivity. Warranty and sales and service and support trump features every time, and that, you know, when you get a pitch from somebody like me trying to sell you a product, you know, I'll certainly roll out my little list of tick boxes and compare my product to another, but ultimately I want to go back to hear, and I promise I didn't pay Mick any money to say that story, but when I hear a story like that, there's no better music to my ears, because we've done our job and we've delivered a benefit. Now, the day trading part, I'm not going to claim responsibility for, but the fact is that the features of the product, the parts that are being used in that situation, probably are 5% of what the product does. But the fact that it does it reliably is what our customers care about and what everybody should care about as far as technology is concerned. We've learnt that trusted sources are the best, that trying to set up technology as a separate enterprise, that trying to set up technology as an independent thing doesn't work, and you've got to have products that can be carried through existing channels, through existing rural retailers. Subscription model is new and people are very wary of it, and rightfully so. That, substituting a capital expense for an operating expense only works if the numbers stack up, and people, express concerns to us, and rightfully so, that, they want to know what the total cost of ownership is, and that's a challenge for information-based products and services. That delivering incremental value is the best way. Technology often challenges people. We've certainly, it's been discussed a lot that we do have an ageing population in our agricultural enterprises. We want to bring in young people, but getting people onto technology is a challenge, and doing that in an incremental way is the best way to go about it. That trying to rejig your entire enterprise in one fell swoop is not going to work, and will give people heartburn. That technology's got to be developed and delivered incrementally. There are a lot of things that are required to get products out into the market, and certification and all these sorts of things can be challenging at times. But ultimately, what you've got to do is capture the information first, and you've got to do that reliably. You need to deliver the insights through information designed by people who know how to present information and who understand the grower's perspective. And that, whilst this screen might make sense to an agronomist, this screen might make sense to somebody who's trying to understand soil water, that kind of thing, makes a lot more sense to people if I can just see, red and green and blue, and then if I need more information, I can kind of successively drill down further. And that as much as possible, it should be highly visual, that we're visual. We've got a couple of million years worth of evolution behind our visual processing systems, and we want to make use of that intelligence and present information in a visual way as much as possible. So, in thinking about the message that I wanted to deliver this morning and to have people walk away with, how can we be a part of it? What does this mean from a policy point of view, from a thought leader point of view? That we need to start today, that technology is out there, that the innovations are out there, that adoption of them and talking about them and advocating them and encouraging them is what we need to do as an industry. Standards are everything. In information, the free flow of information is the most vital thing. And there are already the Ag Gateway and the OADA standards are starting to become very important as people's implements and their satellites and all these different things collect more information, that it's a very important consideration that the ownership and the provenance of that data, the understandability and interchange of that data, and development and participation in the development of standards is the most critical thing for us to do, and that shouldn't be left to the vendors only. And I don't know why I'm saying that, because I'm a vendor, but anyway, I do also come from a standards development background, that I would like to see government understand that they are in the big data business, and that being, an expert manager of information is really critical. That when we talk about and look at and understand opportunities to invest in technology and technological innovation, that that the important outcomes are the creation of knowledge and the fostering of innovation. And we are certainly a case in point of being a great beneficiary from a lot of the money that was spent in response to our Millennium Drought. And in fact, last week, we had a delegation from the Californian EPA coming to Australia to learn about drought response and drought response technologies. The G'day USA program taking place in California in early December is a delegation of Australian companies and policy advisors going to California to tell them, what we have learned about drought response and applying technology to drought response. That collaboration is far more important, especially in sort of industry-funded R&D than commercialisation, and that's probably heretical to say. And maybe I won't get invited to speak ever again. But my point in saying that really is that we sometimes get confused about the importance of commercialising a particular innovation rather than fostering its adoption. The open source and the open standards communities, for the most part, represent much better chances for us to make sure that industry-funded technology and industry-funded innovation make their way broadly into the industry, rather than understanding if we spent $5 here, we got $7 back because we managed to commercialise that particular technology. If it gets out into the industry and the productivity benefit gets delivered, then the money will come back to the industry. That we want to leverage everything that's out there. That we've had some very interesting discussions with Telstra recently, whereby the deployment of our technologies, Internet of Things technologies, can help them cost justify pushing Telstra towers further into rural areas to increase coverage beyond what the resident population, if you like, could otherwise justify, and we need to look for opportunities to leverage. More than that our role is to advocate agriculture and technology in agriculture as a noble and enjoyable pursuit for a career. And we have a lot of success in hiring really talented people for that very reason, that for a lot of people the idea of combining technology and agriculture together and helping improve our food production systems really makes for an easy choice. And with that, I'll call it an end. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matthew. A fair bit of food for thought there. Peter, you're very early off the mark.
Thanks, Matthew. That's just music to my ears, the whole thing. I love technology too. Peter Thompson from Roma in Queensland. A couple of interesting things. Talking of the Google Maps, the latest one that came out for home was done about 3 months ago, which was fantastic. The level of detail, I can actually see a scrub pulling chain on the ground. My question's around and you've raised the issue of farms being a terrible place for electronics, and
Yep.
We've learnt that over the last 15 years. The big issue we've got is there's no one out there with diagnostic capabilities.
Mm-hmm.
There's a whole career in agriculture for
Yep.
people, and I'm just interested in your take on that. Reliability is number one, but
Yep.
no matter how reliable, things will break down. So just your take on that.
Thanks for the question. And it is really important, and I guess it goes to my point about total cost of ownership. So for technology, and again, most people, if I walked up and grabbed everybody's smartphone and ran out of the room, it would be a significant inconvenience. If you're relying on monitoring systems out in your crop to deliver information to you so you know where your crop water's at, that you really rely on that information, and how we can get... I think as people become more familiar with the tools, and actually probably as standards continue to develop, that there will be ways in which diagnostics can be kind of built into the products. And I know certainly that we try every day to improve the diagnostics in our products. It sounds a bit twee, but in actual fact, Bluetooth probably is going to be the best innovation for us because it's pervasive. And so the idea that you could have a Bluetooth connection, walk up close by that piece of equipment and download an app and run some diagnostics, that's the direction we think we're going to go. So part of the answer obviously is bringing young people into our industry and encouraging people to continue to pursue combined technology and agriculture curriculum. And the second is that continue to foster the development of companies, and this sounds very self-serving, but companies who specialise in technology for agriculture. That it really needs to be that combination, and people need to think about those things at the design level, such that when the products get out the door, they really are designed to support that, a basic amount of in-field diagnostic, but then if you can't make it work, you just swap it over with something else, and it should be very fast to swap one product for another. I mean, I guess in a way you can, if you happen to get an appointment with the Genius Bar, or even at Telstra now, and I don't mean that to give anybody a plug, but they can basically kind of suck the brain out of your smartphone and put it into another one pretty quickly now. And we need that level of support in our technologies as well.
What you said about this Internet of Things, David, did you hear that? What you've said about the Internet of Things, it seems in the main that it's about driving down costs of your business. A, do you agree with that? And if you do, what's the real return? Because the return's got to be pretty big if it's going to have a real impact on farm businesses at the farm level. Otherwise, it's just not going to pay off.
Yeah, thanks. That is a great question. I didn't mean necessarily to overly focus on cost reduction. And ultimately, our experience has been that it totally relies on the commodity, the part of the world that you're in, and what the other factors are. So if you like, and sorry that I'm drawing in the air, but if you imagined a triangle like this, and you might have yield improvement in one corner, you might have energy efficiency in one corner, you might have water efficiency or labour efficiency in another corner. The real job of technology is to allow a grower and their advisors to kind of move their point for optimisation somewhere in that triangle. So if I really want to drive for yield improvement, that I drive for yield improvement. That if, as I'm coming toward the end, say, of my irrigation season, we've doing a lot of work in California now, and what a lot of the growers there, the high value tree crop guys are finding is that they're getting toward the end of their season and they're further through their allocation than they might have planned. And so they risk coming up toward harvest and having no water at all, or having to go source the water from somewhere else. So they might start the season thinking about yield improvement, and as the season wears on, they're going to change their practices really to work around water availability. It's not the cost of the water, it's simply the fact that it's available. Even if they had to go buy the water at $500 an acre foot or something, it wouldn't be material in their total operating cost. But if they simply don't have the water available and can push to nut fill or something like that, then the outcome for them, potentially is a downgrade of the price they can get at the processor. So we can't really predict what growers and producers want to optimise for. Our job is to make the tools flexible enough and make the information rich enough that they can optimise for whatever their circumstances require. I don't know if that was an answer to your question or not.
Snowballow, Melbourne University. Matthew, you've made a couple of, not quite throwaway lines, but the problems of IT and agriculture being a bit separate, and then you made a more recent comment about the training needs. And what do you see in this? We're obviously in the business of training agricultural graduates,
Yep.
And many of us in this room are. Do you see a way to integrate into what might be an agricultural science curriculum or even an agribusiness curriculum some, if you like, IT literacy that could even, won't make them essentially specialists, but at least are able to talk to your geeks in a sense of getting better. So where do you see that going, and what do you see the needs in this area that could accelerate profitability and accelerate adoption?
Yep. Well, I guess part of my theme has been talking about what other trends are out there and what we can leverage. I mean, ultimately we're fairly small, we have limited resources available to us, but so with respect to training and having graduates come out with a good level of literacy, be it electronics literacy or information technology literacy, One of the great things about the Internet of Things movement and a related movement that's generally referred to as the kind of maker movement is the democratization of electronics technology. And there are a lot of companies that are moving in the kind of open source space where you literally can construct electronics and systems out of sort of component pieces. And I think that they would be fantastic additions to a curriculum to really, and it might be part of an answer also to Tony's question, which is that would be the kind of literacy that I would want to see graduates come out with. Not an electronic engineering degree, but a basic literacy about electrical and electronic interoperability, and the same for information, that the more open source information can be and the way information is managed, the better able people will be to be able to construct the sorts of tools that will be possible once that information is being collected and is available in an open way. So I guess that requires, you know, the development and fostering of open standards, the development and fostering of a toolkit-based approaches, both to information technology and to hardware. And there are lots of things happening in the broader industry that would really help that. But the maker movement, the kind of Internet of Things being democratized and put into the hands of regular people.
On the farm manager side, what's your observation of the capacity in this area of technology? And, you know, is there a need for capacity building, training, education, out there in agribusiness, sort of on farm? And how would you see that occurring, I suppose?
So most definitely, I think I tried to refer to it just briefly there, but I think definitely doing everything that we can to foster sharing of practices and sharing of information. I think that the capacity building problem I would see coming from two directions, that it's incumbent on the technology companies to make sure that we're delivering technologies that don't have this reliance on a formal kind of training background, that the information should be out there, should be freely available, so people can self-start a lot more. A lot of the trends now with respect to training and with respect to getting information out there need to be a lot more self-help, self-support. And then technologies, like the AgChat Oz group on Twitter, where people who aren't, generally the way information is shared is either in a structured way, so an extension group puts together packets of information and DVDs and this sort of things and put it out through a structured program. People get together in a best prac kind of setting where they all meet at a place and have presentations. The third is through online forums, and I guess the exciting part about the internet, about social media, is the ability for people to find people who have the same problems but aren't geographically near enough to each other to make any of the other means practical, or don't have, say, the industry support or the or other support mechanisms. Hopefully that answered your question.
Two more. We're running out of time, but we'll be a bit lenient. Sorry, Kai, we'll start here. We'll get to you, Ross.
Les Copeland, University of Sydney. Just to follow up Snow's comment, I think most curricula now, certainly in agriculture, the use of technology, the sorts of things that you've described, is very heavily embedded in just about everything. But where I see the gap is not so much in capturing and measuring and monitoring, which, as you say, is really very exciting, going ahead in massive leaps and bounds. The pinch point is how best to get the value from that information, and that's a gap that we certainly have lots of whiz-bang people in the technology side and in the agriculture side, but you actually need people who are sort of in the middle.
Yes.
And that's an area that I don't believe is being addressed as well as it could be. If you look at the analogy with medicine and health and so on, it's the same problem. Our capturing of information is way ahead of our capacity to use it and get the best value for it. So there needs to be some new sort of discipline areas, or cross-disciplinary areas that sort of add value to what you've said.
Yeah, I think you're right, so in our realm, that would particularly be, say, at the intersection of information technology and agronomy, where there are particular things and particular ways of understanding the different stages of growth of a plant that really you can only get through that sort of monitoring. But then the choices that you would have in terms of management and in terms of rolling out those practice changes, we still have customers in the States where they have someone who basically sits in the middle, so someone who kind of runs the technology and prints out pieces of paper that still kind of deliver people the instructions that they need. Okay, this is what we need to do. This is the practice change that we need to implement. So there is a gap there in that translation, and the medical informatics, I suppose, is an area where there has been some development. You can certainly do studies at that intersecting point. It would be very interesting for me to get a better understanding of what the equivalence would be for agriculture.
Yeah, Ross Kingold, really a very similar question to Les and David. That is that there seems to be no shortage of apps that are available and no shortage of data that can be generated electronically. I've been in farmers' offices where they show all the charts and the benchmarking, but they have no means of converting that data into information and knowledge that actually improves the profitability. So for me, I think that's the challenge, is how do you actually generate information and knowledge that protects and underpins the profitability of the business? So how do you rank which apps are most valuable to your business? How do you identify which technology is most needed by your farm business?
Well, I think the answer to that is that it's the same answer regardless of whether you're talking about agriculture or any other industry, is that's why we have a market, hopefully, and we, suppliers of technology should and must be held accountable for the profitability improvements that come from our technologies. I don't know, maybe it's a bit glib, but hopefully the answer to your question is that the products that will continue to get used are the ones that actually deliver. No, margins are so low and profitability is at such risk from external factors that the stuff you've actually got control over, the choices you can exercise about what tools you use, should push the market to deliver the tools that deliver the best productivity improvements. I don't think you can make that happen. I think that emerges from a properly functioning market.
Okay, we're about at the end of our time for the breakfast session this morning, so I'm sure you'll agree with me that it's been a very interesting and a bit thought-provoking our presentation from Matthew, and it's also, to me, very interesting to hear that Australian technology is being exported and recognised as having a leading place in overseas markets. So it's always a bit reassuring when we hear that happening. So I hope you'll join with me in thanking Matthew for his interesting presentation.
Thank you.